Hi, my name is Steve Ehrman. Um, I'd like to talk to you today about some institutions that have been having some success in improving their quality of learning, their equity of access, and their affordability. I've studied six of them. I'm going to be talking mainly about one. Uh, as it says there, I'm an independent scholar. It means I'm semi-retired, which gave me the time to do this research, which took about 5 years. I've been a grant maker supporting innovations in higher education, a program evaluator, um, a researcher, and a vice provost for teaching and learning at George Washington University. This research is not a medical style comparison or testing of hypotheses. It's about creating hypotheses. The question that I started with is it possible for one institution to improve those three kinds of outcomes with one set of mutually supportive initiatives? And how would they do that? I call this pursuing threefold gains because there wasn't another word to describe this relationship of one cause with three outcomes. When I entered college in 1967, was choosing colleges, it was obvious to everybody, I think, that academic quality had to do with resources that were being made available to students, and of course, the quality of students being admitted. So the route to threefold gains back then, within certain bounds, was to have larger classrooms and admit more students. It was a quality gain, and again, the quality is tied up with the resource, not with student learning, because the best instructors could each now teach more students, and each one of those instructors has, to some degree, unique skills, unique achievements. It's a gain in access because, of course, you're able to teach more students, and it's a gain in affordability because it lowers instructional costs per student while also producing additional revenue for paying those faculty, for example, keeping the best ones, finding ones that may be more expensive. This, by the way, is not at all the way that I'm looking at threefold gains. Really, this is more a rejection of that model. What's been going on is a very, very slow shift in paradigms. Bar and Tag, back in 1995, labeled the older paradigm as the instruction paradigm and pointed out that most colleges and universities were organized to support this view of education. Faculty presents content and the smarter students will learn it. So the teaching was solely the domain of the faculty member, typically one at a time, an individual faculty member, and the learning was totally on the students. So the best way to have student learning improve is admit smarter students. The learning paradigm, on the other hand, was a model that even in the 90s, a lot more people were espousing. And it was that you had to look at quality in terms of what real students actually learned and how they learned it. So the faculty member's job, working individually, but also sometimes together with other faculty or staff, was to do whatever is necessary to help all kinds of students become more capable of applying what they've learned. To use one poor term, to make them all smarter, to improve their aptitudes, to improve their capabilities for and their personal attributes like curiosity, say, and ethical behavior by the time they graduate. The six institutions that I studied, whose histories that I studied, are all shifting gradually towards learning-centered practices. And here are the six. I'm not going to read the slide. You can pause if you like and take a look. Each one of the case histories illuminated this larger sort of unifying model that I'm going to sketch about how to make threefold gains that illuminated different aspects of that underlying approach. Georgia State, who we're going to be talking about almost exclusively in the rest of this talk, was notable in part because of the way that it systematically organized its pursuit of threefold gains. Perhaps one of the more unusual ones, Gutman Community College, was started from scratch to be unusually good in quality and access. And so they, with their teaching and learning design in mind and their commitments in mind, right from day one, they were hiring faculty and staff who were committed to and typically had some track record in teaching in this way with these kinds of goals for their students. So as I say, we're only going to look at Georgia State to keep this within a 15-minute talk. Georgia State faced some really serious challenges and began to recognize them in the early 2000s. As the slide indicates, graduation rates became unacceptable to enough people outside the university and inside the university. And the fact that it was even worse for African-American students made it more intolerable. One thing I learned from the literature in the course of doing this research, students who, with limited financial means, who enter college and then drop out are economically likely to be worse off than they were before they entered college, because they would have used up some of their eligibility for financial aid. And of course, they would have a sense of failure coming out of it too. The physician's oath says, above all, do no harm. One of the things that all institutions need to consider is, in what ways are we doing harm and how can we reduce those? So here's some statistics to talk about threefold gains. So we'll start in 2003, that row. Certain number of students were admitted, and 6 years later in 2003, 32% of them graduated from Georgia State. 26% of the African Americans graduated from Georgia State in 6 years, and 22% of Hispanic students. Now, flash forward across a lot of years of history and development to 2019, 50% of the students admitted 6 years earlier to Georgia State graduated within 6 years, 58% of African Americans, and 57% of Hispanic students. These days, there's a statistic that wasn't available back in 2003, which is of all the students that an institution admits in 1 year, how many of them get their target degree from some institution within 6 years? And for Georgia State, 78% of the Caucasian students, 78% of the African-American students, 81% of the Hispanic students got a bachelor's degree from somewhere within 6 years. Quality, this manifested itself in improved rates of passing courses, particularly some of the courses that had had very high failure rates earlier, improved attrition, improved graduation rates. And there are a lot of teaching and learning changes had been made to achieve this goal. Courses have been redesigned, first-year learning communities, a number of high impact practices, and some other educational changes to try to achieve greater student success by improving their education. As far as the equitable access gains, the chart, the table is just one example of that. Affordability, fascinating. Georgia State is a sizable institution. In the period we're talking about, around 30,000 students, very roughly. For every percentage point gain in graduation rates, their base budget improved by over $3 million. So if they went from 32% graduation rate for Caucasian students to 33%, up 3 million. And as long as they stayed at 32% or higher, they kept that additional money. And look at the difference between 32% and 50%, for example, and multiply that by $3+ million per percentage point. This is where some of the revenue came from that Georgia State quite consciously invested in further improvements to try to create more, even higher graduation rates. And as the slide concludes, all these changes also make education more affordable to students. And here's the thing that didn't hit me until late on. The kinds of high impact practices, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the next slide, that led to these improvements improve learning for all students, but improve learning for students from underserved groups even more. That means just because of those facts, that students from underserved groups have a greater benefit of a greater gain of affordability, even than students from students who were doing well in terms of graduation rates before that. So how have they done it? Since 2003, three sets of initiatives, three kinds of initiatives have been launched one after another. The first set of initiatives had to do with educational strategies. I talked about that in the last slide, high impact practices, for example. And those are key, by the way, to making sure that this is inclusive excellence, that this is a gain in access that accompanies a gain in educational excellence. There were organizational changes and cultural changes that made the institution more able to support and grow and sustain these learning-centered educational strategies at scale. To choose just one example, Georgia State created an Office of Student Success, which few, if any, institutions had done before this, to try to coordinate efforts to improve these outlines, starting with developing information systems that would allow administrators and faculty and others to better understand the flow of students from before admission to after graduation, seeing where they were making fastest progress, seeing where some groups of students might be getting knocked off course, and therefore enabling Georgia State to be very focused, very targeted in the initiatives that they were creating for the next round. And finally, there were changes in some of Georgia State's interactions with the wider world. Its e-portfolios have been, among other things, enable employers and graduate students to get a better sense of what it is that Georgia State students have achieved and how their capabilities have improved. The news about Georgia State's achievements got out, and national awards and sizable grants have helped reinforce everybody's sense within Georgia State that they're on the right track. I'll just tease out a little bit the creation of this constellation over a 20-year period, and the impact was cumulative. So you can see at the left-hand side of the figure, back in 2003, the 6-year graduation rate for students entering Georgia State and graduating from Georgia State was 32%. And about that time, they began instituting the first of what became a very large number of initiatives. Not all of them are on this page, that slowly and cumulatively were improving educational performance and equity and affordability. So here's how I'd summarize things. You have widely felt important institutional needs and opportunities that somehow relate to aspects of the quality of learning, equitable access, and sometimes affordability. Everybody has to deal with affordability to the extent that they have to live within their income. And when you're trying to improve things, that's not easy. One of the 6 institutions I studied actually had gains for making education more affordable to students. So you've got these needs and opportunities. That vision can drive and focus the development of the constellation there on the right. And the result of these activities in the constellation is the fostering of threefold gains, which help to meet some of those needs and opportunities. This is way too neat a way of picturing this. And in fact, a lot of this only became clear to Georgia State when they were maybe halfway through the assembly of their initiatives. That's when the Office of Student Success was instituted, and things began to clear about the sort of the systemic nature of what they'd already started. And I take that as an important moral from this. Every institution probably has a leg up on creating a constellation for making threefold gains, whether they are aware of it yet or not. So building your constellation, you need to have those compelling aspirations that drive the threefold gains, because without those large scale ambitions, there won't be a consensus to do things like question faculty reward systems. Just instituting e-portfolios, say, is not going to do that. It takes a combination of things and the sense of getting results before people are willing to take a fresh look at some of what had been the facts of life at that institution. Each of those new initiatives, even when it's just being piloted, needs to be capable of being expanded at scale. In other words, to cover all the relevant students or faculty. That was a mistake that at least one of these institutions made. They started an experimental program with some certain practices and services which only worked when it was small. And as the program began to grow, they had to tear those out and completely start over again. These initiatives, at least some of them, need to be showing some results. That also helps to keep the coalition together. It'll keep pushing to enlarge the constellation. This work takes an unusual degree of collaboration across silos, with people uniting and offices uniting in view of the common concerns. Like, we've got to get these graduation rates going, and to say, well, we could do some of what we needed to do, but unfortunately, graduation rates won't improve because we don't have an office that does that, or we don't have faculty that teach that way. Well, if you're guiding institutional development by the goals that you're beginning to attain, then if there's a capability that's missing, if there's a barrier that's getting in the way, you can do something about it, working together. And as you probably guess, this all takes dogged perseverance in the face of countless distractions. I really hope you'll get in touch, ask questions, make comments. I can tell you about existing articles, in addition to the book, of course. And this video, along with one or two earlier ones, will be available on YouTube. Stylus Publishing is offering a discount for you. There's the code to use, not only 20% off, but also free shipping. And that's for either the paperback book or I think it's the EPUB ebook version. If you want a Kindle, go to Amazon and get it there. Thank you very much. Thanks for sticking with me. And I hope either with the YouTube videos or in some other way, you can let some of your colleagues know about this if you've been excited by what you've heard. Thanks a lot.